And we'll start off today with well, we're going to dive right in deep.
Yeah. This is we covered the APT28 group, I believe FireEye actually. This is a FireEye report again, similar to last time. So APT28 is a group that FireEye has identified that is Russian in origin, they believe, mostly involved in intelligence gathering around defense and geopolitical types of intelligence gathered from organizations and other government agencies that might be more in Eastern Europe as opposed to the US, but in any event, that's not totally exclusive. In any event, they released another article. It's kind of an update on what they've been doing recently. They noticed that this group, and they're pretty sure that it's the same group. We'll get into why they think that in a second. They're using two new exploits. One's been patched, but the other has not. One's a 0-day. So basically, the tactic is very similar to what we've seen before. The person gets spear phished. If they click on the link, they go visit a website that has a drive-by type of infection that has some JavaScript that launches this flash exploit. It launches an exploit CVE 2015-3043, which executes some shellcode. That, by the way, that has been patched. So if you update your Adobe Flash Player, you'll be safe from that. Once it does that, the shellcode downloads another executable payload that tries to leverage CVE 2015-1701. It's been identified, but there's not been any real public disclosure of the details behind it because Microsoft's still working on a fix on it. So basically what it means is this one's being used or leveraged as a 0-day out there on the wild. Microsoft will probably have a patch within the near future here to address that, and we know that they're working on that. In terms of the tactics that they're using, once that privilege escalation occurs via that unpatched Microsoft exploit, they will download a payload, malware payload, that's very similar to Chopsticks or the core shell malware families, which is what APT28 had used before. We talked about it on a previous program. It's just a slight variation of that. It has characteristics that are very similar. Not only that, it also is sharing C2 locations that are within the same /24. So the previous one was in this 87.236.215.x range for various domains to home back to for the old APT28 stuff. This new one is also in that same range, just at .246. So something to keep an eye on in your network, looking for those address blocks, some of these indicators. And I guess also keep an eye out for any patches that are released from Microsoft. If you have Adobe Flash, that's a good way to at least kind of patch your machine because that's the first route through there. So if you have your Adobe Flash Player patched on all your machines, they won't be able to leverage that in order to get this other privilege escalation to occur. So you can at least mitigate it that way by closing the front door and having the bedroom door still open, so to speak.
So a couple things perhaps to note here. One is that I noticed it says user clicks a link to an attacker-controlled website.
Yeah.
Is it attacker-controlled or is it is it a compromised site? I know we've seen.
I don't know. I didn't see that in the article or whether they actually mentioned that or not. We know from experience, not necessarily with this group, but with a lot of these other nation-state groups, what they'll tend to do is compromise other people's infrastructure out there. So legitimate companies that just have usually smaller
ones. Websites that can be compromised.
Yeah, small companies that have websites, or even other websites like vulnerable Joomla instances or WordPress, some of these content management up on web hosting sites. If they compromise those, they can use those as malware drop points to distribute their stuff. So it could be when they say it's an attacker-controlled website, it's just that they compromise it and are controlling it, not so much that they own it outright. And that's usually the tactic they take. A lot of times we see they use other people's legitimate infrastructure for well-known or smaller well-known companies that you would not suspect. Oh, they're going to XYZ company here. So that doesn't immediately look suspicious if you're a security analyst looking at the traffic. But you might need to take a closer look to say, well, wait a second, what are they actually getting here? And is it in a weird path up on that website that makes it look that it could be strange?
Yeah.
So.
Now, obviously, in most of these stories, we have no idea who the target of the particular, they're described in these scenarios. But you have to sort of presume that if they're using 0 days, the assumption is that there are only a limited number of 0 days that are known that the organizations are able to use. Now, we don't know if that's 2, 10, or 10,000, but it's still some limited number, and so the assumption is that it's a valued target if they're pulling out the 0 days.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to burn a 0 day on someone unless it's a rich
unless
target.
they really need it,
Yeah.
or perhaps they're well protected and they're a good target. So the reason I bring this up is because one of the stories we're going to talk about a little bit later has a little bit of the same notion. So we'll touch on that one again.
Okay.
So good point there, John.